Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Earthians Unscripted, where I, Dmitry Sarlev, meet very interesting people and talk to them about what it's like to be basically them. And this time around, I have a very good friend of mine, Aleksander Tonnisson, who we share a reading group with, and who also made a very cool TED Talk recently that inspired me to invite him and to talk to him about either that or, well, anything else that comes up. So without further ado, I want to invite my guest, Aleksander Tonnisson, on the show. Aleksander, you are live, and welcome.
Hey,
Good to
nice to
have
be live.
good to have you here, and thank you for saying yes to something that is completely unknown.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I don't even know what to expect. So let's see where this goes. So it's quite unusual not to know what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, my theory is that when I watched a lot of interviews and even podcasts, and very often it feels like there's this scripted question answer type of thing, or at least the questions part. Sometimes it deviates a bit, even on the good ones, and it's very often like one-sided. And for me, what I'm looking for is just to have cool, interesting, deep conversations with people. And I think the people are much more interesting when you talk to them spontaneously. When they don't have anything to prepare, then what they say is more real, if you know what I mean, like more real you. So that's why I put people on the spot, and I want to get to know, like, who is the real Aleksander.
Yeah, I agree in that sense. So since I've been moderating a lot of events, and typically these, let's say, on stage panels are very well prepared, and very rarely it causes any, let's say, disagreements between the people, because they already have kind of synchronized the answers before the panel actually takes place. Then most of the panels end up being really boring.
Yeah.
So if I'm also moderating, I always keep some of the questions to myself, which I don't let them know beforehand. Also, just to have the same effect which you described. That when on the spot you don't have the filter, or you don't have the time to set up a filter, and then you actually speak from the heart. And so I do agree with that one.
When you say speak from the heart, what do you mean?
Well, what I mean is not having a filter between your, let's say, thoughts and what comes out of your mouth, whatever that could be, let's say, in a practical terms, being politically correct, or not wanting to offend somebody. Not Also, people are very afraid of a conflict, especially if it happens live or on stage, and so stuff like that. So from heart, meaning that you say what you actually mean and not what you think others want to hear.
And do you think that is like, when you speak from the heart? I mean, those are dangers that people perceive, that you can offend someone, or you're gonna say something non-kosher. But are those real dangers, or what do you think is like the benefit of actually speaking from the heart and just saying exactly what you feel, think, exactly what's going on inside? What's the benefit of doing that?
So one of my, I'm going to answer it from a bit different corner, or a bit different perspective. One of the
Sure.
things what I'm working on with myself is what you call social conditioning. And social conditioning is anything which we learn from the society, rules, customs, things you should do, things you shouldn't do, such as holding fork in the right hand and knife in the left hand. Or was it vice versa? It was vice versa, yes. So, and social conditioning basically tells us to live our lives so that we would be accepted by the society. However, very often it's not what people really feel they should be doing, or how they should be talking, and these filters are usually set in a way, or we have been trained, or we have trained ourselves to talk in a way that we don't upset other people. And there's like a lot of topics where controversies are let's say, very big, but none of the less, you hear people agreeing to the same opinion, because this is, let's say, widely accepted, and
Yeah.
nobody wants to go against it. Yeah.
I mean, there's this famous study that they did where they put actors in a room, and showed a group of actors and one actual person, Not that actors are not real people, they are, but for the sake of the argument, in that particular moment, there was only one person who didn't know what's happening, and they put like lines, and they asked, which line is longer and which one is shorter. And there was clearly one line that was, I think it was shorter, right? And all the actors said that one is longer. And the one real person was going last. So, and they were putting them in different positions. He was either first or second or third. And when he was going last, after all these other people, they would always, or not always, but majority of the time, they would conform to the group thinking. And they would say, yeah, that one is the longest. Even though it was clearly the shorter one. And I think that's one of the things I think you were talking about, is that, yeah, sometimes people want to conform. But I think, like, my question in that sense, I was discussing also with my best friend similar topics recently. How do you know what will offend someone and won't, right? How do you make that judgment call? We're also different, right? And how do you filter it out? How do you talk to like one person or the other person, and what will offend this person versus that person? Like, how do you decide that? What do you think is behind all of that? And should we spend more time to try to decide these things?
So I personally think we shouldn't really spend time on that. However, the current, let's say, setup of the world, or more specifically, let's say, Western world, is to be politically correct. So there's, I think the knowing is there. It's I don't really see, let's say, or I don't know how to describe, and then it's somehow people kind of know what topics are potentially offensive and which are not. But if you're one-on-one with a good friend, then very typically it's when you're not kind of, what's the good word, that if the topic which you're talking on is potentially, let's say, when people are, okay, let's take that as an example. If people are asking for advice, they are usually not asking for your advice. They are asking for a confirmation that what they have decided is correct. And
Right.
and more often than not, they don't really appreciate if you say, hey, this is what you've been talking to me. You have a problem with your girlfriend, but what my feeling is that actually you're not really contributing to your relationship, for example. And this is how you can also define a real friendship, is whether you're able to give such feedback or reply to your friend or not. And if we think about our relationships, even with our close ones, like really close ones, as let's say husbands and wives and etc., even in these relationships, it's rare that you can be, let's say, completely honest without having a fear of losing the relationship. So it's a very difficult, I would say, question to answer in a short way, but it kind of comes out from different aspects. But the main thing which defines, let's say, these fears is fear of losing the relationship. And this is where people start filtering their words, and they rather try to be on the same opinion rather than saying something which goes completely against what the other person is saying.
But we know the fears, right? We know that you're afraid to lose the relationship, you're afraid to hurt someone's feelings, you're afraid that other people will think bad of you if you say something. But what are the benefits of doing the other thing, right? What is the benefit of just saying things exactly how they are, without any filters, exactly what you think, openly what you think about each and every person, about yourself? Like, what's the benefit of doing that in our society? What do you think that is?
So there's a lot of benefits. However, I also want to point out one thing. What you said, that saying things how they are is already by definition wrong. I mean,
Sure.
there's different opinions and different perspectives on the same thing. So, but saying as you really see them, or seeing as or saying something which you feel is the case, and there's a lot of benefits in that. And actually, it's pretty much the only way to build a relationship which is uplifting for both parties. And you can only be uplifting if you're honest. And typically in these situations, being honest means going to the feeling level. So that's, you also mentioned my TED talk, and one of the things which I talk about is that feelings and emotions matter, but we tend to rationalize things rather than going on the feeling level, because that's so much more easier and so much more comfortable is to think with your head rather than trying to not think with your heart but listen to your heart in a way. So if we do go on the feeling level and we share with our feelings with our friends and close ones, this is how we can really build a relationship which is uplifting for both persons.
Do you have like a concrete example of that in action? Because I understand what you mean, and I think I fully agree with you, because that's something I believe in myself. But like, in case anyone is listening, just in case that happens, then what would be a practical example of that, right? That maybe in your life happened that hasn't happened before you realized that this is how it works for you.
So I would say very typical example is when people talk about relationships with other people. So they come to you to complain. Girlfriends do that a lot. It's not, let's say, so relevant among males. They don't, at least Estonians don't really like to talk about relationships in sauna, but it does happen sometimes. And usually it's about complaining about the other person and saying whatever, I don't know, my husband does this or he doesn't do that, he's not really romantic, and he leaves his socks around, like all kinds of complaining. And then usually what the girlfriends do is that they like almost become like accomplishers, or like, what's the word, but they say, yeah, I know what it feels, and it's your husband is like really lazy, and they're completely taking the side of the person who is complaining about their husband or wife, instead of actually talking about the person who shares with them. And that's the only thing you should be talking is if you're in a conversation with anybody, then you should talk about you two, or how many people are in the conversation, and not about other people. So if there's socks lying around, so all right, so it pisses you off. So why? Okay, because that's disrespectful. Okay, so you feel that your husband is disrespectful in with you. Yes. Okay, so when you go next level people, do you think there's areas in your life where you are disrespectful to other people, maybe to your husband, to any other people? So you bring the conversation back about the person. So in the end, let's say the behaviors which we can see around us, they must exist in ourselves in one way or the other. Otherwise, we're not really able to spot them. So if you want that conversation to become an uplifting conversation rather than bashing somebody down, you need to bring the conversation back to the person itself. And example from my own life is how I'm looking at the conflict now rather than how I did like 2 years ago. So conflict, most people are really afraid of conflicts in a relationship, because they fear losing that relationship if you go into the conflict. So they rather not do it and live with whatever is bothering them than create the conflict out of it. But if you look at the conflicts in the other way, that the conflict is actually giving you the energy to bring forward the knowledge which you didn't have before the conflict, then you're not afraid of them anymore. And so we have had a lot of conflicts with my wife after I discovered that. and it's amazing how much we have learned. The other day we had a conflict about how to use a sink in our home. So for me, sink is a tool. So it's a tool to wash your hands or wash whatever you have in the kitchen, but needs to be washing. But for my wife, very often what she does, she puts things in the sink. So we had a conflict over the fact that I said that if you put things in the sink, I cannot use it. So you're breaking my tool, and that makes kitchen for me non-usable. And so I could also have, for example, wash the dishes myself, which she put in the sink, or not to talk about it anymore. But I decided to actually bring it up, and it did actually create the conflict. But what came out of that conflict was the fact that which I didn't know before, that for her, that she sees the situation completely differently, and for her it's not a tool, but just a place to kind of like, so if you have something in your way, it's a very convenient place to put things out of the way so that you could use something else. And I didn't really know that she has this point of view. And then it also came out that it doesn't annoy her if she puts things in the sink, but it really annoys when I put things in the sink. So like kind of like a lot of things came out within this conflict, and that's what I mean by kind of talking without filters and really saying what is bothering you, and then taking that knowledge, you can then make your relationship better, which I think at least now with sync problem is much more clearer for both of us, like how it's working.
I think you touched upon a lot of very interesting and deep topics there, right? One, and I keep talking about it, and I think I'll keep talking about it in almost every episode, because for me, this is the core of surviving in the world and feeling good about it, right? To me, that is understanding that each person sees the world absolutely uniquely, right? I think if you take 50 people and ask them what is a sink for them, a very stupid question on a face value, right? They go, well, it's a sink. What do you mean? Well, if you start asking deeper questions, how do you use it? Why do you use it? How often do you use it? Do you clean it? Do you like to clean it? Etc. And you start going deeper about a very simple topic. Out of those 50 people, you get 50 completely different answers, right? Like, say, for me, it's both a tool, but it's also a storage place for dirty items before they are transported into the dishwasher. For other people that I know, they would like those items to be directly transported into the dishwasher. But I have a storage place before they get transported. And there's a very specific logic why that is. But other people might not appreciate that logic, and that's fine, right? But everybody will see a totally different way of how they use the sink. And I think that's where the conflict is, and people don't appreciate the other's point of view. For somebody, sink might be a beauty object in their home, right? And if you put stuff in it, well, the beauty objects becomes less beautiful. I had a very interesting example about that with a man we met with Valerie in Burning Man, and he was sharing a story about their fight with his girlfriend, and that was about music. And he was saying, look, we have this song, and we keep fighting about it. I think that this song is the best song I've ever heard in my life, and she says it's the worst song, right? And they keep fighting about it. And then, we started asking him questions and going like much deeper into it. And then what we learned is that for him, a song is, 95% the music, the tonality, how the notes play around. For her, the song was words, right? The lyrics, the meaning, right? And of course they can't agree, right? Because if the song itself is beautiful, but the lyrics are bad, for one, it might be the best song ever, but for the other, it will be something else entirely. And my theory is that that's actually what all conflicts are about. Both big in world scale and small is just people disagreeing, or not even disagreeing. They're trying to force their view, like internal view about your sink, onto other people. If I use it as a tool, you must use it as a tool. If I use it as a tool, everybody on the planet must use it as a tool. Right? And if you disagree with me, we'll have a problem. And I think that's actually the core of all conflicts on Earth, on people, on societies, wars, whatever, is that somebody sees the world in a certain way, and they want to make it better, but then they don't realize that their better is not necessarily better for someone else. It might be actually a lot worse for someone else who sees the world very differently. And I think, that's a super valid point, and it's super difficult, extremely difficult to constantly keep it in mind. I mean, I forget, right? But once you do, I think it opens up, once you become curious about how does the other person think. That's actually the reason I created this whole thing, is because I want to know about how do you think about the sink, right? Or other matters, right? I want to know how you function. I feel that there's so many differences. It's not only the sink, it's even how you see things, how you hear things. and this minute details. I want to invite one friend to the show later who can hear music. Who can see music. A lot of people can hear music. He can see music. I think it's called. I forgot the name. Begins with a name. I'll look it up. I remembered before the show, but basically he can see music. Uh, so the variance of the differences of how we interact are actually huge, and they're not just about the thing; it's about everything. And I think this is a very curious thing to actually try to learn. And I think in a relationship, if you're curious about it instead of fighting it, that helps you to kind of move on and do things as well. And I think the other thing that you mentioned that I liked and I use, and we both know that we use this tool, is this mirroring concept, right? But can you tell more about it? Like, how do you actually use this mirroring? Because I think it's complicated. It took me maybe half a year to a year to actually realize, how to use it. What's the benefit from it?
So it also took me for a year. What you just shared, I brought up one of my favorite quotes. Was what you said, that forcing our worldview on others. And the quote goes like that the people are trying to change the world for better so that they wouldn't have to change themselves.
Yeah.
and that kind of, for me, summarizes very well what you said. And it does happen. I mean, I think most happens with most of the people. But yeah, mirror concept is a really, really interesting one. It also took me quite a while. Also, I would say a year after I first heard about it, when I read about it, and kind of understood the theory, but wasn't able to apply it in my life. So the mirror concept basically says that all the people around you or any other person are a mirror for me. So for me, all the people in my life are mirrors for me, and so are all the people in your life, Dimitri, mirrors for you. And what that means is that the only way we can learn about ourselves is by looking at other people around us, people in our relationships, and sometimes even complete strangers on the world. So that's one of the main concepts, is that to learn about ourselves, we need people in our life. So just looking into yourself is a nice concept, doesn't work in my opinion. So you need other people to learn about yourself. So, and what a mirror means is that if you now think about any relationship in your life, and it's a bit easier, I would say, to start with the ones which are not working well. So if there's somebody you don't like, then how to experiment with a mirror is to think about that person and create a list, either in your head or on the picture, about the things that you do not like about that person. And you call that process labeling. So you start giving that person labels, or you start giving the behavior that that person exhibits labels. It doesn't really matter. So if I would give you, Dimitri, a label, I would say that you're very hardworking, but I would also say you that you're arrogant, for example. So and now if I'm able to give you these labels, and if I'm able to see that behavior in you, then the theory says, and this is what it takes now a year to understand, that this theory really does apply in life, is that the theory says that you're only able to see a behavior, and you're only able to see the labels which exist in yourself. So you're applying to other behaviors and other labels, and that's why it's really interesting. Also, sometimes you see that the person does something and it really, really annoys you, and some other person does it and it doesn't annoy you at all. But this is something to really look into. So what is the difference between these two things? But anyways, now you have labels. You have somebody you don't like, you have given that person a label. Then the next step, how to understand the mirror concept, is to see where these labels apply in your life. So for example, if I see arrogancy in you, Dimitri, then my next step would be think, okay, so where am I arrogant? And there's a lot of places where I'm arrogant. So for example, with my kids, and that's been an ongoing challenge for me is to try to get rid of this arrogancy which I have with my kids, that I feel that I'm superior to them, but I haven't been able to solve it. But I'm just bringing this as an example to show how to bring back labels and the behaviors about yourself. But that also, and it's really, really important to understand working with this concept, is that you can also, or you should also bring back positive labels. So it's not only that we see negative mirrors, it's not like that, but we also see positive mirrors. And this is something which people very often forget, is that they also need to claim this positive mirror. So if I say that you're hardworking, then that means that I'm also hardworking. And I know for a fact that there's areas in my life where I could give 100% and work very focusedly and deliver results. And I'm very good at. And kind of taking that credit and saying, okay, I'm also hardworking is really, really important. Otherwise, if you start looking only at negative mirrors, you very soon start feeling really bad about yourself because you feel that all you do is negative, and then you stop using them eventually. So that's kind of the best best way I can describe how I understand the mirrors.
Yeah, I think I definitely subscribe to that fully, and I think it has. I've been trying it in my life a lot, and I think kids are a prime tool example for that as well, right? Both when they're young and when they're old. Well, not old, but when they're kids, right? But what I notice very often is that, say, my kid is having a hard time or crying or feeling bad. And before I knew the mirror concept, I would be like, what's wrong? What's happening? Trying to figure things out. And he actually told me once, when he was 2.5 or 3, I was like, why are you feeling so bad? Why are you so stressed? And he's like, I'm not stressed, you are. Right? He took the mirror and he just put it in front of me. Right? And when he said that, I was like, wow, right? Like just hit me. And I think that was one of the moments when I really understood the power of mirrors. And I realized that my kid's behavior was like reflecting directly myself, right? And now I'm always looking at it very carefully. We have a 4-month-old kid now, and like he is amazing at everything, but mirroring especially. Like he feels all the little things that are happening within all the people around it, mirrors everything. So like if I want to know how I feel, I just look him straight in the eye. If he's smiling, like, okay, I'm having a good day, great. Like almost to that extent, right? And I think that goes to everything in life as well, and with other people. That's been a great tool to really learn more about myself. And this labeling process, that's the difficult part, right? The labeling itself is maybe easier, but the difficult part is to actually take it and really work with it, right? And be like, okay, if I see arrogance in someone else, then like, where am I arrogant? And then what am I going to do about it? Am I going to change? Am I going to stay arrogant? Am I going to be this person that I don't like in others? I mean, clearly, if I don't like it in them, I don't like it in me, right? So I have to change it. And I think this is where a quote that I once said, and I like it, was that, like, and you said something similar just now, is that my feeling is that it's not that people cannot change, is that they're just too busy changing others instead of themselves, right? They go like, well, you're the one not doing the dishes, right? So I'm gonna change you and like force you to do it my way, instead of figuring out what's really happening with me, within me. Why do I react like this? Why does this small thing piss me off? What can I do about it? And what is interesting with that is that very often when I did it well and I went all the way and I changed my behavior, then other people seems to have changed as well, right? Like I changed my behavior. I didn't do anything to the people that were pissing me off, and suddenly they don't piss me off anymore, and they stopped doing the thing that was correct, like making me upset. And I was like, I didn't do anything, I didn't even talk to you about it, and then suddenly I don't see it anymore, right? When I saw it a couple of first times, that was really fascinating to me, that this can happen. And another thing that it helped me with is this, I think very often when you get negative critique or when you talk about these things, you can take it personal, Like when you tell me I'm arrogant, it's very easy to be like, to feel a bit of a resistance. And what that happens in relationships often is you start fighting each other. And then the conflict is, like, there is no conflict, but you create the conflict out of thin air. Because, and this is where I knew this, but I came up with a trick just a couple of days ago, is to add "for me" at the end of a sentence of what people tell me. Right? So when you tell me you're arrogant, in my mind I add "for me." Right? So I realize that it's your opinion of how you perceive me. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm arrogant. It might. I may be arrogant. I think I am in several ways. But I think it helps me to also kind of remove some layers and to deal with the real things, right? To just add this "for me," and it helps a lot not to take offense at things and really deal with things and really talk about things, right? Because, like, for instance, if I add this "for me" to what you said, that I'm arrogant, then I can ask you questions about it, right? Without feeling this negativity inside, and just be like, well, what do you mean? Why do you mean it? In what specific situations have you seen me do it? What do you think I should be doing about it? And making it, owning it, making it about myself, and like really going deep in your mirror, because that gives me a lot more to think about. So I think it's a very cool tool. The worry I have is it's really hard to explain in a 20-minute discussion, and it's much harder to internalize it. I think the first time I heard it, I liked it a lot, but like making it work.
There's also a really important thing about, let's say, working with mirrors or labels, whatever you call them. Doesn't really matter how you call them. It's what you mentioned is. Let's say arrogance being like a negative mirror, and that's also something which it's really important to understand, is that for different people, let's say, different labels could mean a positive or negative thing. So it's really about the question, like you said, you put it in a very, very good way. If I don't like this behavior in the other person, then if I behave like that, I start disliking myself. So, and arrogance, I think, is a very good example. Is that, for example, I don't like if I see arrogant behavior around me. So, for me, this mirror is a good working tool to get rid of my own arrogance. But for some people, it could be exactly the vice versa. For them, the arrogance, it could be the kind of the life goal. Maybe we're like so, let's say, behind the scenes all the time, or but like never in front of people, never in the spotlight. And for them, this label could be actually something which they are like kind of driving forward to. So that's also kind of important to understand that in reality, there is no, in a sense, negative or positive labels. It's only how we perceive them.
Right, yeah.
And same with emotions, and same with feelings. And people put this negative labels. So if I feel anger, that's bad. And if I feel sadness, this is bad. So only good emotion is feeling joy. But in reality, emotions are emotions, and you don't need to put them in a negative or a positive category. But you should only be looking them from your perspective in a way that whether you find this behavior or this label good or bad, and then that kind of act accordingly. But that not necessarily meaning that putting it in a negative category for like till the rest of the life.
Yeah, and I think it's also in many ways, I think it's also in some ways inevitable that negative labels will always be assigned to you, whether you want it or not, no matter what you do, right? And I find that also fascinating, not in a bad way. And I think not just negative, positive, all labels. Like, I like to think of it in a way that every person I meet and talk to, and who knows me or knows of me, has a different me living in their head, right? So somebody who met me for maybe 10 seconds, and in that moment maybe I was a little bit angry and I said something, well, I usually try not to, but maybe I said something in a way which they perceived where I am, well, let's say an asshole, right? So there will be that one person who only met me for a little bit, who creates a whole image of me as that, right? And there will be other people who have a slightly varying image. And literally every single person who knows me has a different one. Nobody has the same one. Somebody has maybe uniquely, somewhat close images of me. If they, for instance, like say a couple that I might know, and they speak a lot. Okay, that's maybe arrogant to think that they speak a lot about me, but they maybe have discussed me once or twice, right? But they maybe have a slightly close idea of, for them, who is the concept of Dimitri, right? But nobody has the same. And interestingly, I don't even have the same, right? My own idea of me changes the whole time. So there is no kind of like, for instance, if we take meters, we will put the meter in Paris under a dome, this is the meter, but there is no this is the Dimitri, right? That concept doesn't even exist. And I find that fascinating, and that also helps me to like not take offense and to understand that everybody sees each other's differently. And because nobody has enough chance to talk to you, Aleksander, for except maybe your wife, like the whole time. So there's very few people who even know like a tiny portion of you, right? Like a 1%. And I think even you don't know we're close to 100%, right? I think we're trying to get to understand what's this thing we're living in, and we get somewhere, but we don't even know. So people you talk to, they know even less. And for me, actually, this is one of the coolest things that I've realized in my life, because that also gave meaning to my relationships. Because what I realize now is that, as you said, I learn more about myself through other people. And basically having a deep relationship with someone, whether romantic or non-romantic, it means that they are helping me to get to know me like at a deeper, more meaningful level. Whereas short relationships usually don't achieve that for me, right? And that's why I prefer to have long relationship with a few people than short relationship with a large amount of people. And that's why I invest more time towards my friends and family. But I also value short relationships, and that's, I guess, why I'm doing this as well. But the point of all of that is that I think to understand that everybody sees you differently, and I think that helps to deal with a lot of issues that people have and conflicts that people have with each other.
And it's really interesting. Also, one also concept which took me quite a while to understand, but also incorporate in my own life is if we talk about close relationship, and let's talk about the partner, is that but you can also think about every person as I mean, we come to this world, we have a certain gender, we're either male or female, or basically we're a man or a woman, right? But then there's also this concept of male and female, and that's not directly connected to the gender. So and again, it has a lot of names. It has a name of yin and yang, left brain, right brain, a lot of it. But the interesting thing is that if you do believe that that every man also has an inner female, or female half, even you could say, and every woman also has an inner male, then the interesting thing about the mirrors is that the only way you can ever get to know that inner female for me as a man is to have a close relationship with a female, with a woman, and that's the only way. Otherwise, I cannot actually see the mirrors. I need to get to know my own female half, and that's also really interesting kind of concept. So what's important doesn't really have to be your partner, but it is very important to have somebody in your life who you have a very close relationship from an opposite gender. And why opposite gender? If all these, let's say, polarities exist in every person, is that by nature it is so that men are stronger in the male polarity and women are stronger in the female polarity. So if you have another man in your life, for example, and he does have a female polarity, it just doesn't show very well. So if you want to kind of also get to really know everything about you, when you need good relationship and close relationship with people from other genders. So that's also, I think, really interesting thing to realize about having these, let's say, mirrors and things in your life.
And that's an interesting point in the sense that I can imagine, because you just I know the concept, right? And you just mentioned it very briefly. And I think because of that, a lot of people can start throwing stones at us right now, because of the way we use words, right? They may have understood it, that you may have said just now that a man must have a woman gender next to them. But I think, from what I heard, that is not necessarily true. What it means that inside, right, the polarity must be stronger on one side or the other, right? And the more diversity you have, the better, right? And in the sense that, a man who is physically born a man can have a stronger female polarity or a stronger male polarity. So, the gender is less important. It's just a statistical thing. But I think it's maybe the internal feelings and the internal polarity. And that's where it's very dangerous to call it men and male and female polarity, because those are very heavy words in our society right now that are being, fought all over. So I do prefer yin yang, or, left and right, just for political reasons. Which brings us back to the beginning of, saying things exactly how you think you should be saying them. And I think it's right that you said it that way. And I need to think about this, because now I'm trying to be politically correct, and I'm not sure if there's any reason for that. But I think the reason I'm trying...
I think it's kind of important to understand, or it really depends on what school of thought you're like in, and I like to look at, let's say, different school of thoughts, and then try to make up my own kind of my own idea. And it's interesting that this concept is very, very similar across most of school of thoughts. Is that gender matters, and gender matters in a sense that, again, now it depends whether you believe that there's a meaning to the life or not. So if there's no meaning to the life, then also gender does not matter. But if we think that life has a meaning, and there's life after life, and maybe there's even reincarnation, then it's then you all of a sudden you start to need, or you actually need to start thinking about, like, why am I here in this world as a man, and why not as a woman, and why is another person here as a woman? And the school of thought kind of says that to really unleash your full potential, then a man can have a full potential only if he stays, or primarily in the male polarity. And same is true for a woman who can only realize her full potential when she primarily stays within the female polarities. And that doesn't mean that like in every person you have two polarities, and there are a lot of men for who the female polarity is the main polarity. But learning from that mirror is actually much more difficult than having a woman in your life who's strong in female polarity. But again, it's throwing around a lot of words. But kind of the easy conclusion from here is to have relationships in your life. The closer, the better, from different genders and people with different backgrounds. And that's kind of the best, let's say, formula to learn about yourself.
Yeah, I think that part I definitely agree with. That I think trying to surround yourself with a diversity of people of all kinds, all polarities, helps, right? And I think it's more important now than it ever has been, because, and that's where also my theory is that, like, I call it Earthians for a reason, right? I want to help people to live in a sense of unity where we're all from Earth, we're all people. And it has this maybe somewhat dreamlike desire to help people unite in their thinking, which is in some ways impossible, but that impossible dreams should be chased. But what I do think about that is that what a lot of people do, which I don't subscribe to, is, although it's necessary in some ways, but for my own personal thinking, it doesn't work. Is I think psychologists, philosophers, everybody, that they start, and I understand why, and I understand why it's necessary. They divide people into groups or categories, right? From the Briggs-Meyer test, where you get 4 letters, to some other test where you have 8 categories or 2 categories or just gender categories, whatever categories. And then there's all these categories. I understand why that is done, right? It actually, and I subscribe in the sense that it can be a bit of a shortcut to understanding someone if you get their Briggs-Meyer 4 letters, and you're a little closer to understand it. But what I am interested in is trying to understand each individual I meet uniquely, and try to understand each one unique, because nobody is ever perfect in any category, right? There is no perfect, ENTJ person, right? They still are varied in some way or other. And on some matters they will be more extroverted, and on other matters they'll be more introverted. And it's a very complicated thing that we have in our heads and souls and whatnot. So I think it's super valid and important to actually look at the uniqueness of each individual to understand yourself better. And the more unique people you have around you, the more you understand yourself. So if you surround yourself with only people who think like you, act like you, think like you are less likely to learn more about yourself and humanity overall. You need more mirrors, basically, right? And the more diverse the mirrors, the better, because if it's the same mirrors everywhere, it's, to me, less efficient. I think, as we discussed, I definitely need a number of mirrors that are very deep, that I can go into my whole life, like close relationships. And I do need the diverse mirrors, right? Because they show me the errors in my thinking. And I need mirrors that are different, unique, mirrors I've never thought about, of all kinds. And I think that is, I think that is super valuable for everyone to have.
But it's a really interesting topic you touched upon, and I think it could be a whole 1.5 hours only about that. But I do think it's really crucial also in understanding within the conversation we have today is that what you said, categorizing people, and the problem I see in a society today is that such, let's say, well, I call them tools. Let's say such tools as, specifically, for example, if you're trying to put a diagnose whether a person has a virus or not, is also categorizing the people. And so this categorizing people is really demonized, without understanding that in certain situations, or let's put it the other way, different situations need a different tool to solve that situation, or if you have a problem. So I always like to think about these situations as building a house. So if I'm building a house, I have to solve awful lot of problems. Starting with concrete, I have different materials. I have concrete, I have bricks, I have wood, I have plastic, I have copper. Like then I have the electricity lines, and and if I would now only have one tool to do all my job, then that would be a terrible house. But for some reason, if a, let's say, a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever categorizes a person in a category, it seems as if against human rights. But I don't think so, honestly, because looking from this keyhole, which says whether you have, let's say, anxiety, or whether you have some kind of mental disorder, then you need to actually use these categories. Otherwise, you cannot fix the problem. And then looking from different keyholes, you always get to the different result, but you use the tool or the keyhole according to the situation. So female and male polarity is just another tool. It helps us to explain and, let's say, to explore our full potential. But that doesn't mean that every situation in life makes sense to look through that perspective. So there's other situations where, for example, whether you're a left wing or a right wing supportist makes much more sense, because in that case you understand why these people, two persons, cannot get along. There's nothing to do with female and male polarity. It's all to do with the fact that one supports liberal economy and another person wants that all is regulated. And so it's for me, the understanding is really important to understand whether we talk about conflict, whether we talk about psychology or female and male polarity, yin and yang. It's just tools, and you need many of them in your toolbox in order to to really fully understand life. And I do have a problem with people who, on the other hand, have the problem with people who are using only one tool, and they try to kind of see the world through one keyhole, and they refuse to see through others. Very often it comes with certain, let's say, religions that like literally say that either you take it 100% and you may not look left or right, or otherwise you cannot belong here in this religion. And I do have problems with these types of looking at the world, and also interpreting all the situations through one keyhole. For me, it's really, really dangerous way of living and looking at life.
I gotta say, you're an amazing guest. In one paragraph, you touched upon religion, politics, and male-female rights. Well, I see success coming and just around the corner. But what I want to do an experiment just now that is maybe less related to what you said, but related anyways, right? You just said now that you really dislike people who use only one tool. So where in your life do you use only one tool, if this is a mirror?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think again, like you said, kids are a very, very good mirrors. So I almost always, if there's a conflict with kids, I solve it in a way that I'm right and they're wrong.
Okay.
And the tool is power. The tool what I'm using is I'm in a position of power, and with my kids I definitely use it a lot. So if there's an argument, I always win. So that's, for example, a behavior which I would rather not have. But it's a progress ongoing. So I'm trying to accept them as not my property, but as a individual and completely self-sustainable person who has their own thoughts and own ideas and own feelings. But it's work in progress. But yeah, that's kind of definitely one example I can bring.
How do you? I'm curious in your case. Like, how do you do that, right? Because, like, let's say I brought you a mirror. You saw it. You saw that you use only one tool. Like, in practice, how do you go from seeing it to actually changing something in your life on a practical level, right? Because a lot of these things and labels are so ingrained in you since childhood that it might seem that they're so difficult to change, right? Yeah. Arrogance, or being what do you call a person who only uses one tool? That person, anyways. How do you change something like that that's been so ingrained? What steps do you take?
So it's a very gradual progress, but basically the technique itself is simple. It's just bloody difficult to apply in your life. But the first step actually is noticing. So first of all, the fact that I see this behavior in somebody else is the very first step, that I can actually put my finger on it and the label. And then sometimes, I mean, what happens very often in real life is that people just say, I don't like that person. and that's it.
Yeah.
But they don't take the next step to trying to understand what is exactly what they don't like in that person. So that would be the next step. Now, if I could identify what is exactly that I don't like in that person, so the next step we already have talked about it, I try to bring it back about myself. So where am I exhibiting these behaviors? And now that I'm aware of them, and now comes the difficult part, is the awareness. So there's like, again, putting people in two categories, but I think for this example, it works. There's two types of people. One who go through life half asleep, and then others who are fully awake. And in order to be fully awake, that means that you need to be aware what happens around you and what happens with you. So now that, let's say, if I'm trying to get rid of using power or using too much power, now I make that my priority or my task, that I want to observe situations where I use power and just be aware of it. This is the next step. And now I can go back in time. For example, think about last 1 week. I can bring examples from today where I used power with my kids. So that's one way to see where did I do them. And another one is that while it's happening, and just awareness is very, very important step. Otherwise, you can't change the behavior. And now then you have you are aware when this happened, what is the trigger, what is bringing forth. The next and the final step is changing your behavior, and you can also call this as not doing. So not doing what you used to do in this situation. So now if I have a conflict with my kids, and I know that usually I don't really listen what they think, and I just introduce my solution, and this is this solution and no other solution, and being in a power position. Next time when I'm in a similar situation, instead of offering my own solution, I could ask them, so, okay, so I see that this behavior is not acceptable. You know what really happened today?
I do want to know, yes. Of course I want to know, with that smile on your face.
I had another call with my accountability group today, and I'm sitting in my bedroom and looking outside the window, and my younger daughter, who is already 8, goes, and we have like houses around us, so we live in so it's all private houses, and not a lot of like trees. It's still a young neighborhood, so everybody can pretty much see everything which happening in my yard and in everybody else's yard. And now she goes behind the greenhouse, which is from glass, so you can see through it, drops down her pants, and instead of going to the toilet, does her thing behind the greenhouse. And I'm like, but I'm in a call and I cannot do anything about it, right? So now if I'm in the power position, I would go and tell her, this is not acceptable. If she does this next time, there will be a punishment, and blah, 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 blah. Or if I would now want to change my behavior and not be in a power position, I could go and say, hey, I saw you do that. Why? And maybe she says, I don't know. I know our front door is locked. Maybe our porch door is locked as well. It happens sometimes. If you close it in the wrong way, it sometimes gets stuck. So maybe the door was closed and she really need to go to the bathroom and she couldn't get in the house. But if I'm in a power position, I would never know. I haven't had the conversation yet, but so that would be a different behavior. And this is how I, like, step by step, acting differently in these situations where which triggers my let's say power position behavior, and I start kind of getting rid of it. And then that just means acting differently than you used to, and however differently, just differently than used to. And it's just amazing how you get completely different results.
Yeah. And I think, again, different people see things differently. I mean, for me, it's totally natural if kids want to, be close to nature. It's how we used to do everything, and I don't understand all this social norms thing until we are a little older. that notwithstanding, I also think that, you know, this whole concept of labels and mirrors and working through that is so powerful and so worth it that you almost need to be doing it all the time, right? Even like as you were talking right now, I was also thinking about the fact that it did annoy me a little bit, the the categorization, the of you categorizing people, right? And then I was like, well, why does it annoy me? Why does it annoy me to categorize? What does it mean? What's the label for that? And it was also a label for, I think for me it's this concept of kind of like, I know how the world works type of thing, that maybe sometimes annoys me in others, because I do believe in the fact that everybody has a very unique experience of that. At the same time, as I believe that everybody has a unique experience of the world and how they live it, I sometimes find myself talking about the world as a de facto, almost like a very teaching, just do this and you'll be fine type of thing, right? And that is something I'd like to do less of, because I feel that is, when people do that, they kind of put themselves above others, right? And they say, I know how to solve your problems, which in fact nobody does know, right? They can guide you, but whenever you do this teaching, which I call teaching, and tell people exactly what to do, my feeling is that they actually know that it's actually worse, right? They become worse off. And then I was like, well, that's a mirror, right? For me, and it's a known mirror that I'm already working with. I actually have a list of these, like an actual physical list that I think I told you about before. But and for me, it's just a reconfirmation of that mirror. And one of the ways I'm working with that is adding, for instance, for me, right? So when I now, like the behavior I'm trying to change is to say, like, if this is done, I can't come up with a good example right now, right? But let's say mirror concept is the best concept. You should do it because it works for me, right? That's maybe a little bit arrogant, right? But if I say, I've been using this mirror concept and it's been helpful for me, right? Without really pushing it on the person, right? And just sharing my experiences and telling more about what are the benefits and how I used it. And then if they take the tool and it works for them, great, but they don't really have to. But that's also an example of how, we talked about other things completely, but we both got a mirror to work with, right? We both got something to work with. And very often you don't notice it, or you don't speak about it. You called me arrogant. I told you I don't like how you categorize things. I think in a lot of discussions that doesn't come through, right? And I love that. I love the fact that is possible, right? And that's possible with you. But I still have that fear of doing it with a lot of people, right? Because a lot of people will respond aggressively to labeling, even though it's not about them. But I think that, if anybody is watching or listening, this episode is definitely about that concept, right? To me, of learning how to work with yourself using other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and there's a good news about it, and there's a bad news about it. do you wanna hear this?
Well, yes, I do. Of course, I want to hear it. I'm the kind of person who wants to start with the good news.
Okay, all right. So the good news is about it. It's a progress. So it's not something where you let's say moving from A to B. So whatever you're doing is good. So it doesn't matter how well or how much or like it doesn't matter. It's really about the progress and whatever and however you use it in your own life, it works. That's the good news. The bad news is that well, according to different teachings, it probably takes several lifetimes to learn it. So this could be really demotivating for some people. And especially if you don't believe that there's a possibility of reincarnation, when knowing that it takes several lifetimes to learn. So it's the thing is that the concept itself isn't overly complicated, but it is, let's say, difficult to keep the self-discipline of putting that into action. And I definitely noticed with myself is that that for me, I had to go through, let's say, a transformation. And transformation for me was that I had whatever you call burnout or a mental breakdown, which forced me to look at life in different ways. So typically people who find themselves thinking about what is life purpose and why we're here, and looking at these different tools, very often go through a very painful process. And that's necessary. Otherwise, you would never look into it. But that's good or bad news. It really depends how you look at it. The tricky part about it is, and I definitely noticed it within my own behavior, is that as soon as you're, let's say, through this hole or hell or whatever you want to call, and things start going better, very easy to switch back to your old habits, and not having to look into mirrors anymore, and also trying to avoid conflict instead of using conflict as a tool, and let's say reading a lot of books and a lot of things which take a lot of effort, and it's so difficult to maintain. And I think that's why it takes several lifetimes, is that it's just to live your life in a way that you're fully aware and not half asleep all of the time takes a lot of practice. Doesn't come overnight, and you lose motivation along the way, because sometimes you see results right away, sometimes you don't see any results. So I think that's kind of why it could take more than one lifetime to master.
Yeah, and I think I have a feeling that I actually want to summarize this discussion right now, because I have a feeling that I've gotten my label for myself that I need to work with. And one thing I do get is that once I get a label, right, I don't want to let it go, right? It's if I do that, then usually it becomes a bit of a waste, right? So I want to start working on it right away, because otherwise it's kind of, oh yeah, okay, I saw a label, and then it's gone forever, right? I need to write it down, I need to make notes about it, I need to conceptualize it. But what I do want to say, I think, in conclusion and in a summary, because I think unlike the previous episodes, this was very focused on one theme, right, on one topic, and I like that a lot, right? So and as a summary, I think what I would like to say is that when you're doing this concept, right, the mirroring concept, and you're applying it to your life, and you're going through life, and you're trying to do that, what you said there I found very important, is that there's two things that will force you to do it. It's either going to be a huge crisis where you will have to relook at your whole life, and where you will have to reevaluate yourself, and that is inevitable, and it happens for many people. It can be something very painful, like a loss of a loved one, or career change, or many other things that can put you in a state of crisis. It can also just be a mental breakdown or a burnout, and then you just have to do something, right? You have no choice. To survive, you will have to act. And the other thing is forcing yourself and just doing it yourself, right? And I chose for myself not to wait for the crisis, right? Because there's you can right now, after watching this, you can be like, okay, that was all good, I'm not going to do anything, and I'm just going to sit down and wait for the crisis, because that's what you will be doing if you don't start working on yourself, whether using these techniques or any other techniques. It doesn't matter what techniques you actually use, in my opinion, right? But you have to do something. And if you don't do something, then, well, eventually the crisis will come, and then you will have to do something. That's my thinking and opinion, that the crisis will always come if you don't try to change how you live. And that's why I choose to do it proactively and not reactively. And I really believe that it has saved me from many possible crises by doing it this way, because I'm the kind of person who just doesn't want to wait for life to hit me with a brick and then to figure things out. So for me, that would be my summary. Alex, anything from your side to add?
Yes. As a final thought from my side, I would like to categorize people into two categories. But I'm reading a book from it's an Estonian author, but also she kind of writes about how life works and really interesting books. But one of the concepts or life philosophies which she is describing is that every person and the same balance is working in the universe in general is 51% goodness and 49% the opposite of good, whatever you call it, evil, bad. And so is the life in general in the balance. And if things get out of the balance, when there's too much good, it's not good at all, by the way. And if there's too much bad, then that we can all imagine what might happen. But why is it important in the context what you said is that now if we split people into two categories according to her, and that's also kind of what my experience is, that there's 51% of the people who actually learn in a good way, not having to go through pain, and then there's 49% who learn through the pain. I unfortunately, at least from my experience, feel that I belong to this 49% who has to learn through pain. Most of my life lessons have come through painful experiences. Nevertheless, I'm thankful for them. But yes, the good news is that about 50 or 51% people do not actually need this crisis, and they can learn in a way that you're, Dimitri, learning. So that's how that's my final word. Thank you.
Cool. Hey, thank you so much for this discussion and for joining me on a live stream where we talk about the things we don't know what we're going to talk about. And if you ask me, I think that turned out well, and we covered some very important topics in terms of how to work with mirrors, very practical that people can take away and start to applying with all the necessary steps. And I really enjoyed finding the mirrors for each other as an example in that process. So thank you for joining. Stick around, we'll chat a little bit after. But for now, thank you everyone for watching this episode. Thank you, Aleksander, for being with us today. This was episode number 4. Next week, I'm inviting Stuart Rogers, who is also a good friend of mine, who recently, he's a very well-established journalist in the startup space, and he will be talking, well, I don't know what we'll be talking about with him, but he likes to talk about mental health issues in the startup and entrepreneurship space. We did do one podcast on another podcast with him, and I really felt that the vibe of talking to him was amazing, and I wanted to bring him to my podcast to do that again. But where that discussion goes, we can only see next time on Earthians Unscripted. If you liked what you heard or didn't like it, let me know, comment, ask questions, follow us, and join us on Patreon. Thank you very much for listening and tuning in today. This was Dimitri Sarle and Aleksander Tonnisson. Over and out. Ciao.